Judging functions are organizing, evaluating processes with a rational attitude. This means these functions organize and evaluate people, places, things, ideas, theories, emotions, everything by placing a judgment on said things. This includes extroverted and introverted thinking and extroverted and introverted feeling. The frontal lobe is responsible for much of the executive functioning of the brain. It is involved in working memory, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, task initiation, organization, impulse control, emotional control, and flexible thinking. These tasks fall under the judging functions. Thinking is the mental process of interpreting what is perceived. In Jung's model of typology, the thinking function, along with feeling, is a rational function. Thinking is the psychological function which, following its own laws, brings the contents of ideation into conceptual connection with one another. It is an apperceptive activity and such may be divided into active and passive thinking. Active thinking is an act of the will. Passive thinking is a mere occurrence. In the former case, Jung submits the contents of ideation to a voluntary act of judgment. In the latter, conceptual connections establish themselves of their own accord, and judgments are formed that may even contradict the intention. Active thinking, accordingly, would correspond to Jung's concept of directed thinking. Passive thinking he called intuitive thinking. The capacity for directed thinking Jung called intellect. The capacity for passive or undirected thinking he called intellectual intuition. Further, Jung called directed thinking a rational function, because it arranges the contents of ideation under concepts in accordance with a rational norm of which he was conscious. Undirected thinking is in his view an irrational function, because it arranges and judges the contents of ideation by norms of which he was not conscious and therefore cannot recognize as being in accord with reason. Thinking that is governed by feeling, Jung does not regard as intuitive feeling, but as a thinking dependent on feeling. It does not follow its own logical principle, but is subordinated to the principle of feeling. In such thinking, the laws of logic are only ostensibly present. In reality, they are suspended in favor of the aims of feeling. Thinking, if it is to be real thinking and true to its own principle, must rigorously exclude feeling. This, of course, does not do away with the fact that there are individuals whose thinking and feeling are on the same level, both being of equal motive power for consciousness. But in these cases, there is also no question of a differentiated type, but merely of relatively undeveloped thinking and feeling. Okay, so active thinking, or directed thinking, would be related to the cognitive functions of extroverted and introverted thinking, which Jung called intellect. Passive thinking, or intuitive thinking, would be related to cognitive functions of extroverted and introverted intuition, which he called intellectual intuition. Feeling is the psychological function that evaluates or judges what something or someone is worth. In Jung's view, it is a rational function like thinking in that it is decisively influenced not by perception but by reflection. Feeling is primarily a process that takes place between the ego and a given content, a process, moreover, that imparts to the content of a definite value in the sense of acceptance or rejection, like or dislike. The process can also appear isolated, as it were, in the form of a mood, regardless of the momentary contents of consciousness or momentary sensations. Feeling, therefore, is an entirely subjective process, which may be in every respect independent of external stimuli, though it allies itself with every sensation. Even an indifferent sensation possesses a feeling tone, namely that of indifference, which again expresses some sort of valuation. Hence, feeling is a kind of judgment, differing from intellectual judgment in that its aim is not to establish conceptual relations, but to set up a subjective criterion of acceptance or rejection. When the intensity of feeling increases, it turns into an affect, i.e., a feeling state accompanied by marked physical innervations. In everyday usage, feeling is often used interchangeably with emotion. The latter, more appropriately called affect, that's affect with an A, is the result of an activated complex, or in other words, emotions are bodily reactions that are activated through neurotransmitters and hormones being released by the brain, whereas feeling is a conscious decision. Feeling not contaminated by affect can be quite cold. Feeling is distinguished from affect by the fact that it produces no perceptible physical innervations, i.e., neither more nor less than an ordinary thinking process. Essentially, what Jung is explaining with his definition is that feelings are subjective decisions that cannot be seen or observed, much like thoughts. And emotions, he uses the word affect, are the physical reactions that can be observed. He mentioned that feelings without emotions can be quite cold. For example, someone who is stoic has feelings, but shows no emotion. A feeling is as indisputable a reality as the existence of an idea. The feeling function is the basis for fight or flight decisions. As a subjective process, it may be quite independent of external stimuli. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it.